Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming out. Can you guys hear me? I know the audio and video is very delayed, like 30 seconds, so it's gonna be hard to figure this out. But okay, seems like everybody can hear me. Okay, so thanks for coming to the presentation. This is gonna cover a lot of things about landing an internship, where to find them, all sorts of stuff. So let's get into it. So please feel free to ask questions at any time. Usually we do this presentation in person, but obviously we can't do that now. So please feel free to ask questions in the YouTube comments section or the chat section, I guess. I'll be keeping an eye out on that, and I'll try to answer any questions at the end of each slide if possible. So who am I? Most of you might know me, some of you might not. I'm a computer science student at the University of Windsor, technically still a student, although I only have a couple courses left to finish part-time, and I consider myself graduated because I moved away, started a full-time job and everything, but I am still technically a student. Um, I interned at Shopify in Toronto in the summer of 2018, my first internship. And then, what was it, 4 months after the end of that, I interned at Google in Mountain View, California, their headquarters, from January of last year to April. And then I interned at GitHub in their headquarters in San Francisco, California, the summer after that, so last summer. And I am now currently working as a software dev at Shopify. Was supposed to be in Toronto, but now I'm remote forever. So technically, I'm not really bound to a location. But yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I'm working here full time. Yeah. So to give you a bit of a view of my other experience, these are just some of the companies that I've interviewed with. So you can see like Bloomberg, Stripe, Facebook, Google, Tesla, all sorts of companies. So I have a lot of interviewing experience and applying experience, and I'm happy to share that knowledge with you guys today. So why do an internship or co-op? So I use the word internship a lot, but really they're almost exactly the same. We're actually going to go over the differences between an internship and a co-op position in a bit. So when I say internship, I almost always mean also co-op. So why do an internship? The biggest reason is to graduate with relevant experience. So you're going to be far ahead of other computer science graduates who didn't do an internship or co-op, and you'll be graduating with work experience, which is awesome. Puts you way ahead. It gives you the opportunity to discover what fields of computer science you may like or dislike. So, for example, say you do your first internship in IT and you decide that you don't like that. Well, that's great. You found that out during a 3 month temporary position instead of being stuck there full time for years on end. Um, so you can figure out, hey, maybe I like web development or IT or AI or distributed systems, all sorts of different fields. Another big reason is money. Um, and depending where you land, you can make a lot of money, but almost all positions pay a decent amount. Um, but you can really, really make money, like enough to pay from one internship, pay, your next couple semesters in school just from a few months of working. So there's definitely a lot of money in tech, especially well in internships as well, but especially full time too. And that's another big reason is that an internship can lead to a full time offer. So that's definitely one of the biggest reasons. Most of the time, like if you do well in an internship or co-op position, you'll have a you'll have the opportunity to convert to a full-time employee, and that's great. A lot of the times you actually skip the interview process because they've seen you work for the past 3 or however many months. Um, so yeah, that's awesome. Like say you do 3 internships during your 4 year degree, chances are when you graduate, you now have 3 potential full time offers, and you could also be applying to other places. You get to negotiate between these places. It really gives you a lot of leverage. Another reason is to travel and experience different places. So, like a lot of students at the University of Windsor, I am from the area. I never moved away for school, so doing internships kind of gave me that experience that I missed out on to move away for the first time and hang out with new people and new places. So I got to live in Toronto, I got to live in San Francisco and Mountain View or San Jose, and it was a really awesome time. Met a lot of people, and that kind of goes into the next point, which is networking. You meet a ton of people, and now I have friends who work, of course at the places that I worked with, but also they moved on to other places. So now I have friends who work at Tesla, SpaceX, Google, government, so many other places, and it's just awesome to have this wide network of people that you can talk to and potentially get referrals at other places, but also just make friends with people. So a slide I added just yesterday. It's a little depressing, but internships during COVID-19. So it's no secret that jobs are a lot harder to find during the pandemic. The University of Waterloo's co-op department reported that they actually had 50% fewer job postings than ever before this semester. So that point's pretty scary because it doesn't mean 50% fewer jobs than last fall. I think they mean like ever before, even when they started the program. So it's a pretty scary statistic. But uh, if this is your first time searching for internships, don't let this semester get you down. This is not a normal semester, or this is not a normal year, or however long this lasts. Another important note about COVID and internships is that the U.S. government actually suspended most visa programs, including the J-1 visa, which is the visa that 95% of the time you would need for an internship in the USA. So it's at the moment it's pretty much impossible to get to the US, besides a few exceptions for an internship. But don't let that stop you from applying for American internships that are set for next summer, because you never know, that restriction might be lifted by then. So internships versus co-ops. I mentioned I would talk about this earlier. An internship, there's a few small differences. So an internship is usually one that you apply to on your own through job listings and referrals. Um, and that means that you don't actually need a co-op program. You actually find these postings on any job board yourself and apply to it like a regular job. The downside of that is that you're on your own for preparation and applying. So if you have no experience with applying for a job or building a resume, you kind of lose out on that resource if you're not in the co-op program. However, internships tend to pay more than co-op positions, uh, by probably a pretty large amount, especially if you end up in the US. So most co-op positions, at least in our school's co-op program, tend to pay, I don't know, from like 17 to, I think the highest I've seen in our co-op program is maybe $24 or $25 an hour. Whereas internships, they can get to more than double that if you go to the States. Uh, anyway, so co-op positions, you apply through the co-op program and the co-op portal, which is like a directory of co-op jobs that the program provides for you. Some of the jobs are easier to apply to because you're going through the portal that has half the information you need. But a lot of the times, the co-op program also just links you to the job posting that you would normally go to if you're looking on your own. So it's not that much more helpful. Um, the co-op program has connections to some companies that are exclusive to co-op students. Um, so there's a few companies, I can't think of any at the top of my head, that only hire through co-op programs. And it's usually smaller local companies. And the biggest reason for that is that uh, they get tax breaks for hiring co-op students through co-op programs. So it saves them money. The co-op program provides workshops for resumes and cover letters and a lot of other things. I might be biased, but I don't think they're very helpful because uh, they're more they're more about general resume advice for like business students and stuff like that. It's not tailored to the tech field, and there's a lot of advice that they give that you really shouldn't follow if you're applying to tech jobs, because we have there's some specific rules and expectations when it comes to tech jobs. Um, the co-op program is essentially another course with assignments and tasks. That's one of the downsides to co-op, is that when you're okay, so say it's, let's see, I think in winter of your second year, you're now applying to co-op jobs, you're completing assignments, stuff like that. You have to complete a few assignments in the off season, when you're actually in school. And then once you start your co-op position, you also have to complete, I don't know how often it is, at least monthly assignments, and fill out forms and stuff like that for the co-op program. So it's extra work that can be pretty annoying and tedious. But and then there's also co-op fees. I think it's like $600 a semester extra. Um, yeah, so there's some upsides like the resources that are available, and it might be a little easier to apply to places. But internships is kind of your own thing. You're doing on your own, and it's a little more work, a little more difficult, but there's higher reward. So some common misconceptions and myths. A lot of people think that internships are unpaid. Um, that's that is not true at all. I've never seen an unpaid tech internship. Like, yeah, you'll see postings for them maybe in the States every once in a while, but there's always outliers and everything. Um, Most internships in Canada will pay obviously at least minimum wage because that's the minimum legal amount, but they'll pay like the co-op positions, like I mentioned, start at like 17 or 18 bucks an hour. And another myth that I didn't write down is that a lot of people think you're like a coffee fetcher as an intern. That's like a Hollywood stereotype. Not true at all. You're doing a lot of the work that even full-time employees would be working on. Another very common misconception, and this is partly because I think the co-op program kind of tricks people into thinking this, is that you're not allowed to apply to internships if you're in the co-op program, or you have to let them know. This is this is very untrue. Although the co-op program does advise against it, they'll say don't apply to places without telling us or keeping us in the loop. My response to that is that if you're applying to 100 internships, are you really going to send them 100 emails and keep them followed up with every single situation? No. Um, so you can absolutely apply to internships if you're in the co-op program. It's not like say you get an offer and you want to stay in co-op and you bring it to them. They're not going to say, "Oh, you got this on your own? Goodbye, rejected." No, they're going to happily take you in because you're just another statistic to add to their numbers. That they helped you get an internship. So you can definitely apply to internships if you're not in the co-op program. Also, a myth is the other way around. Some people think you have to be in the co-op program to apply to internships. Again, that's not true. You're applying to these like a normal job. And then another thing is people here, they see this last slide. Oh, co-op has assignments, they have fees, they have less job postings, and their information isn't very good. Why would I stay in co-op? Why would I pay extra money for something that's not as good? Uh, and then they say, oh, let's drop co-op. Let's just do internships on my own. My advice, my personal advice, is that internships are more difficult to get. It's a lot more competitive. And I recommend that, especially for like first timers, if you're in your second year, at least keep co-op as a backup until you get your first position. Because once you get your first position, whether it's through co-op or not, it's a lot easier to find a second one. And it just gets easier with every single one you get. So keep all your options open until you at least get one position. Okay, so how do I land an internship? 4 simple steps: prepare, apply, interview, results. So step 1, preparation. Landing an internship, especially your first, can be difficult. So here's how you can prepare. The most important one, in my opinion, is building side projects to make up for a lack of experience. And also, in my opinion, the best way to do this is to attend hackathons. And I think if you have no idea what this is, you kind of missed out because I'm pretty sure this past weekend, U Windsor hosted Border Hacks, um, which is a hackathon. I think they partner with maybe a school in the States, but it was a hackathon hosted this past weekend with a lot of U Windsor students. But I'm going to go over hackathons a little more later on, but it's a great way to build side projects to make up for any lack of experience. Build a nice resume. So we're going to talk a lot more about resumes later on. Practice coding problems. This is like one of the biggest ones for interviews, especially for the biggest companies that take thousands of applications a day. They can't give you a personalized interview every time. They're going to send you a coding challenge to filter out the weaker candidates. And most of those coding challenges are data structure and algorithm questions that exist on LeetCode and HackerRank or through that you'd see in like the ACM competitions, stuff like that. So I'm actually going to show you LeetCode. LeetCode is my favorite of those websites. That's not supposed to be showing. Actually, I don't think I need to sign in. Maybe I do. Nope. Okay, so LeetCode.com. This website contains thousands of problems. You can sort them by frequency, the amount of times people see them in interviews. So, say I complete an interview, I can go to LeetCode and report that I got this question at this company. And if you pay for premium, you could actually sort like the top questions Google interviews ask and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, you can go on here and list a problem, some example inputs and outputs, and you code your solution. You can run it, test it, stuff like that. You can find the solutions to problems if you can't figure it out. And there's a lot of comments and discussions on every single question. So it's a really great resource. Another piece of advice is read Cracking the Coding Interview. This is a book you can find on Amazon for like 30 bucks. And it's written by a really talented engineer. I forget her name, but it's a great resource because it doesn't cover just how to solve technical problems, but it tells you how to communicate and think during an interview, and it covers all the other things that you wouldn't think about. P in the search bar, huh? I'll bite. Aha! Narcissistic. Whew, okay. Okay, next slide. Hackathons. So I mentioned this is like an awesome resource to help get some projects going, which helps the most with a lack of experience. So it's an excellent way to learn how to apply your school knowledge and come up with a cool project. So in my case, when I started applying to internships for the first time, I had no personal projects. I just had things that I worked on in school. I had no idea how to apply any of that knowledge. So what I did was I went to a hackathon with some of my friends, and that kind of just kickstarted it. We figured out a project we wanted to make, and we all worked together. I learned, how to write Python, learned how to build a project, and started applying that knowledge that I learned in school to other things, other projects, and stuff like that. So a hackathon is usually a competition to build projects, usually over a long period, like 24 or 48 hours. So in normal times when they're not online and they're actually in person, you're actually staying at this. They're usually hosted at school, at a school. You're usually staying at these schools for 24 hours straight if you're not from the area. So it's pretty greasy. It's pretty sweaty, but it's a fun time. They're completely free. You don't have to pay to get in, and almost all of them include free food for the entire time and free snacks and Red Bull, and it's really a great time, especially if you go with some friends, or even if you don't have any friends to go with. It's a good way to meet other people. Probably half the candidates go there with no group and find one when they're there. Um, so larger hackathons actually will cover travel expenses for like really exceptional people. Like if it's a hackathon in Ottawa, they might pay for your train ticket or your flight to Ottawa if you're a really good candidate. And tons of companies are recruiting at hackathons, and they're giving out swag. And it's again, hackathons are so good to go to. Like you'll have booths from tons of different companies, CSEC, Shopify, banks, all these different companies will set up booths there with recruiters, and you can talk to them, network, get referrals. If you don't come out with anything from that, they have a ton of swag, shirts, whatever you want. And in the end, hackathons have a ton of great prizes, like thousands of dollars worth of prizes. They're giving out Xboxes, Oculus, stuff like that. And a lot of people think like, oh, I don't know how to code, I don't know how to do shit. Why would I apply to a hackathon? Any experience level is welcome for pretty much all hackathons, and actually most of them prefer first-time hackers. They specifically seek them out. So you could go there with zero knowledge other than your school experience, and I promise you will have a good time and you will learn from it. So a good way to find hackathons is on the MLH website. You can see their logo here. MLH stands for Major League Hacking, and they're the organization that kind of runs and facilitates most hackathons in North America. So if it's an MLH hackathon, they have high standards. They'll probably have free food and all that stuff, and it'll be a great time. So you can go to the MLH website and you can see a list of hackathons in 2020, for example. And this will be for North America. You can see there's one in Toronto on September 6th. And, and there's just a huge list trying to find border hacks. I don't know if they went through MLH, but this is a great way to find hackathons. All right, I'm going to just take a sec to read the chat. Looks pretty brutal. Okay. Again, feel free to ask questions. It looks like shit posting mostly from Ryan and Ekshot and Brennan, and Arsh, but yeah, feel free to ask questions whenever. Okay, so step two. We just went through step one, which is preparing. Step two, applying. So when do you apply? For summer internships, it's a little different than the other two terms. So summer internship applications open a lot earlier. So say I wanted an internship for next summer, summer 2021. Applications for those actually started probably last month for some companies, but they'll go all the way. I should actually update this. They'll go from August all the way to like March of next year. So you have to keep your eyes out for the next few months. But right now is definitely for the biggest companies, definitely like prime time to start applying. And then for the other two semesters, so fall and winter, some companies hire year round. They'll hire for summer term, fall term, or winter term. You're usually applying 4 months in advance. So say the fall semester, that's September, you want to apply in like May through July. So applying, like I said, most tech companies offer summer internships, and a lot of them also offer non-summer term internships, like in the fall and winter. And also some companies have internship programs specifically for first and second year students. Some examples of that are Google at EP, Engineer Practicum. I think they might have actually renamed it to Bold. I'm not sure if that's the same thing now, but Microsoft Explorer, Facebook University are all examples of this. Um, so if you're looking for companies, you can browse job listings on a bunch of online boards. So here's a list of a few of them: Intern Supply, LinkedIn, AngelList, Glassdoor, Indeed, and you can also look for internship postings on the company's career page. So intern.supply is actually my favorite. I'll show you that now. This is like a crowdsourced list of companies. It's definitely more geared towards like American companies, but you'll find some Canadians on here too. But this is a giant list of companies. Sometimes there's a link, sometimes there isn't. You can see a lot of them are unavailable. That doesn't mean that they're not still up. It means that the link changed or something like that. But these are all companies that provide internships. And then another good resource is LinkedIn. So I know LinkedIn's pretty cringy, but it's a good resource to find jobs. So if you search for, say, software intern in Canada, you can see there's a whole bunch of them. Some of these posted 2 hours ago. So this is another good resource for finding jobs. And there's a bunch more here. So another piece of advice is to diversify your applications. So a lot of people will apply to Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon. They'll get rejected and they'll say, "Why didn't I get an internship?" That's because you applied to 4 places, and they're some of the hardest places to apply to. So apply to a ton of places. Apply to startups, large companies, local companies, all sorts of different companies, and as many as possible. So I'm going to pull this up again to give you an idea. I have my spreadsheet of my applications the first time I applied for internships in my second year. Now I can scroll down all of these, and right here you can see the results. Most of them are rejected or ghosted. Ghosted meaning I never heard back. There is 163 companies on this list that I applied to my first time around, and I want to say 5 or 6 offers that ended up happening. and most of them I never heard back. So that just gives you an idea of, how many you should be applying to and what your chances are. It's pretty tough. So yeah, another piece of advice is to get referrals if you can. If you know somebody that works at a company, apply to it, or sorry, message them and ask them about it and see if you can get a referral. So a referral is basically a personal message like the recruiter or in their system that almost guarantees that somebody at that company is going to review your application specifically and personally. Doesn't mean that you're going to get an interview automatically. It just means that they're going to guarantee somebody's going to look at it. All right, just gonna take a look at the chat. Okay, so somebody asked, I heard that if you do an internship while you're in the co-op program, do you get shit from the co-op office? So I kind of talked about this earlier, but I'll say it again. The co-op office will advise against applying to internships on your own, but in the end, if you get an internship offer and you bring it to the co-op office, like for whatever reason you want to stick with them, they're going to be more than happy to take you because you're just another number, another student that they can say, hey, we got them a job, when in reality you did it yourself, but they will gladly take you in. Now, if you tell them, I applied to an internship on my own and I'm quitting co op, well, that's a little more risky. I mean, realistically, they probably won't do anything, but I'd just quit co op and not tell them about getting an offer. All right, so step three, interviewing. Most tech companies have really highly technical interviews to assess your coding and problem solving abilities, like I mentioned before. So the interview process can vary greatly between companies. So, for example, at Tesla, I had actually no, I'll give an example. IBM, I had a IQ test basically. It was like a puzzle solving test that seemed really outdated, and that took about an hour. Then I had a phone call, which took about half hour, and then I had an on-site interview there, which took another half hour, and it was basically just talking about my experiences and my interests, and that was super easy, and I got the job. GitHub, I had a coding project, then a interview with HR, which was a half hour, and then an interview with my potential manager for an hour, then let's see, a technical interview with another engineer for an hour, and then a personality interview with another team member for an hour, and then a diversity and inclusion interview, whatever that is, for another hour, and then a follow-up interview with HR for another 45 minutes. Most of that was all in one day. So you can see that the process varies a lot, especially when, depending on the places you apply to, and the timing also varies a lot. So with Google, I applied in July and I got my offer in November. Like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later. That took forever. At Tesla, I messaged a recruiter and I had an offer within 10 days. And they ripped through the interviews really quickly. So it's very different. For Google, somebody asked, isn't there like 7 or 8 interviews for Google? For full time, yeah, that's pretty accurate. But for internships, it's usually a coding challenge and then 2 or 3 phone interviews for Google's internships. For full time, it's a lot more. Anyway, so here's the typical interview process for the big companies. And when I say the big companies, I mean like the big four, Facebook, Google, Amazon, Microsoft. So usually there's a coding challenge with most companies you apply to, which is an automated coding challenge that, it's completely automatic. You're not working with someone. It's not an interview. It's very LeetCode styled. And then there's usually 1 or 2 phone interviews. And then sometimes there's on-site interviews for internships. Okay, so Ali asks, what do phone interviews consist of? Most of the time, for the big companies, it's a technical interview, just like the coding challenges. So it'll be like here, open this shared document, sometimes like a Google document or a coder pad, and they'll paste the problem in there. Um, that again is very like leak code like, data structures and algorithms, and they'll say, solve it and explain your thought process. And you're just talking to them while you're solving this problem on your screen. That's usually what it is. But sometimes with the smaller companies, if you have a phone interview, it's just like a conversation. Those are a lot more fun. Talking about your experiences. But anyway, for on-site interviews, those can be fun because the company will most of the time pay for your transportation. So like Facebook, for example, flew me out to Menlo Park, California, which is in the Bay Area, and put me in a hotel for 2 nights, and I got to spend 150 bucks a day on food or something insane like that. And yeah, it was really nice. So if you want a free trip, get good at getting interviews, and yeah. Okay, Zane asks, would you say messaging recruiters or managers on LinkedIn and sending them an email is effective? Yeah, that's absolutely effective. A lot of the time you won't get some answers. It's not going to hurt your chances, like if they don't respond or whatever. It's what's the saying? I don't know exactly what the saying is that I'm trying to trying to get out there, but there's no loss in messaging a recruiter. You only have something to gain. You have nothing to lose. So definitely reach out to recruiters on LinkedIn and don't give them like the basic, because you see it all the time. Recruiters complain about this all the time on LinkedIn. So somebody will message them and say, "Hey, I want to interview for this position. Here's my resume. Let's get it done." Uh, you want to do something to stand out. So like how I got my Tesla interview was I was connected with a Tesla recruiter for a while. A lot of recruiters will just accept anybody, and he posted something, I don't know, something really funny that related to me, and I messaged him about it, just saying like how I thought it was funny, and that got the conversation going, and the next day I had an interview. So you want to stand out. And then somebody asked, Morgan Freeman, hello, asked, what is Shopify's life interview like? Seems unique. Yeah, that's a good question. So the first part of Shopify's interview process, if you get an interview, is called the life story interview. Um, and this one's pretty unique. You don't really see it at other companies. And it's basically talking for an hour about your life, um, talking about your life, how you became you, your experiences. It's pretty intrusive, not gonna lie, but it's fun. Like you're really comfortable with recruiters. All our recruiters are really cool, and you're just talking to them. It just feels like a conversation, really, and you just want to sound unique. It's a big personality test, basically. And I think it's awesome that they do this because compared to companies like Google, where there's no behavioral interviews at all, it's like, hey, can you solve this problem? Can you solve this problem? Yes. Don't care if you even speak English, you're hired. Um, and I ended up working with a lot of weirdos who, yeah, they're yeah, they don't really care about personality there. They just care if you can solve problems. Um, but yeah, I think that's I'm caught up with the questions, so I'm going to move on. So technical interviews. Usually there's two styles of technical interviews. There's the data structures and algorithms, like leak code questions. And I showed you that platform before. And usually the interviewer expects an optimized solution, not just the brute force solution. So just because you solved it doesn't mean you're good. You want to solve it in an efficient way. So a good strategy is to, and most of the time you can come up with like a brute force solution right away or within a few minutes. And it's always good to mention that solution first. Usually I say, okay, here's how I would solve it in a brute force with a brute force solution. But I know that's probably not the most optimal way. But I'm explaining it to them so they know I can at least solve it in the most basic way. Instead of just going for the optimized solution right away and then potentially failing, I'm explaining at least I know how to do a basic solution. And in a technical interview, communication is key. You need to be explaining your thoughts. So even if you don't solve the problem, what they're looking for is your thought process and how you solve problems. So I forget who it was, but there was one company where I didn't even end up solving the problem, but they said they really liked the way I communicated and really liked the way I thought, and I ended up moving on. Um, and then the other type of technical interview is the domain specific. interviews. So say I'm applying to a local company that works with Java. They might ask me, what is polymorphism? What is dependency injection? Stuff like that, specific to the posting. Usually I like those more because it's just research and like quiz style questions. But yeah, some more tips just for any sort of interview. Prepare a cheat sheet with bullet point answers to common questions like, tell me about yourself. You're going to get that on almost every single interview. And just have that in front of you during an interview. Obviously, not if it's an on site interview, but if it's a phone interview or over camera or whatever, that's definitely really useful. Another piece of advice is to sound enthusiastic. If you're talking kind of like I have for the past hour, I'm not too enthusiastic when I talk. I'm pretty monotone, but I try to sound very excited when I talk to them, kind of like this. And because if they think you're bored and not really interested, they're not going to be interested in you. So sound enthusiastic, and you kind of have to check yourself a lot. I know I have to. Uh, so definitely try to do that and read about past interview experiences for the company on Glassdoor. This is such a great piece of advice that a lot of people don't think of. So I'm going to show you this again. Glassdoor. This is a website for job postings, but I mostly use it for company reviews. So you could go to any company, let's say GitHub. I'm going to search for it. Okay, so on the company page, you can see reviews for the company. You can see how people think, and it's all by people that actually work there. You can see what they think of the company. You can see a list of jobs. I never really use this. You can see how much they get paid. So you can search for like internship positions on most places and see how much the pay will be. Normally Glassdoor is actually a bit lower because every year pay gets higher and the data kind of gets outdated. But the most important thing to look at is interviews. So I'm interviewing for a software engineer position. So I'm going to look at those interviews. You can see, okay, there's a take-home coding exercise. There's an interview with 2 engineers. They're, using a Google document. Sometimes they put the exact questions. Let's see if I can find anything. What do you expect a manager to do? What does this diversity and inclusion mean to you? Ask about big O notation, stuff like that. So this is an awesome resource that you should always use when you're going to interview with a company to give you an idea. And then some more tips for some common behavioral interview questions are tell me about yourself. You're always going to get this. And a lot of people will just rehearse their resume. I worked at this place, I worked at this place, I go to this school, and yeah. But don't just mention technical things like, yeah, I worked at this place, I did this, blah, blah, blah. In my spare time, I like to travel, I like to do this. For example, Majid likes to watch people beat their faces in on UFC. Mention things that make you unique as a person, not just your resume. Um, another common question is, what are you looking to gain from this internship? That's a pretty common one. And then, what is a favorite project you've worked on? What kind of obstacles did you run into when working on it? Stuff like that. And another big piece of advice is to organize mock interviews with friends. Oh my gosh, this is so helpful. I barely even do it, but when I did it, it helped a lot. So the biggest challenge with interviews is a lot of people get nervous. Um, standing up front and just having someone judge you. um, it's pretty nerve wracking. So you can organize mock interviews with your friends, and have one person be the interviewer, the other person be the candidate, and get up on a whiteboard and everything. And this helps you kind of prepare for the setting. And I even get nervous, solving a problem in front of my friends. I don't want to look like an idiot. So it helps you prepare for those situations. So the last step is getting your results, whether it's an offer or a rejection. So most companies will call you with the results from your interview, especially if you receive an offer. You're going to get a phone call usually. So if you receive the offer, that's awesome. Celebrate, analyze it, make sure, can I live off this pay in this location? Is there a housing stipend? How do visas work? Is there moving benefits? Stuff like that. If you don't receive the offer, if you get rejected, thank them for the opportunity. Don't get hung up on it. You saw my list. I applied to 160 places, got rejected by 150 55. Um, Usually they ask you to wait at least 6 months or a year before applying again. So with Google, you usually apply like once a year. Um, yeah, but one point I want to make is to expect rejection because it's very common in this field. So if you apply to your first place and you get rejected, don't think you're terrible. Again, going back to that spreadsheet I showed you, 160 rejections. So just don't get hung up on it. Some resume tips. A big one that you'll always hear in tech is to keep your resume to one page. I know for some people it might be hard. For me, it's getting really hard to do that. But there's actually a statistic, I forget the exact amount, but it's something about recruiters at tech companies only read an interview for an average of 4 seconds before making their decision. They quickly rip through your experience and your skills mostly. So keep your resume to one page. Keep it concise. Keep the good stuff up front, and that's definitely an important point. Find a good resume template online. So a lot of people will use LaTeX. LaTeX is like I don't even know how to explain it. It's like a styling markup language. And Overleaf is a tool to help you compile and work with LaTeX easier. Um, so yeah, I'm not going to pull up my resume now, but you can just look into LaTeX and Overleaf resume templates. It's pretty good to use for resumes. Um, Submit your resume in PDF format. This is a huge one. Do not submit Word document files. Um, the reason for that is that Word Microsoft Word is not always backwards compatible. There's version incompatibilities. There's system incompatibilities, and formatting almost always gets screwed up when you set it to a different system. Whereas with PDFs, the formatting is never changed. So try to always keep a PDF format. And even if you write your resume in Microsoft Word, you can export it as a PDF. Yeah, keep it to short bullet points. Don't have long descriptions, multi-line descriptions. Mention your accomplishments. Try to quantify them. So say, I improved testing times by 33%, or I developed a feature that's now used by 10,000 people, stuff like that. Always try to quantify it. Numbers look great. Use action verbs. So, stuff like, oh, I designed X with Y. Say like, I designed this backend feature using Python and created this and blah, blah, blah. Use action verbs. And also an optional thing, some people say it's good, some people don't. I do it on my resume. I bold keywords on my resume. So like develop a backend, you can kind of see it's bolded there using Python and Flask. I basically bold any keywords that I think a recruiter might be looking for. And my last piece of advice is don't list your average if it's less than 80%. I'd probably up that number to 85 now. Even then, like, you have nothing to lose by not listing your average, and you have everything to lose if you do, if it's not good enough. So we'll talk more about grades later, but yeah, like I mentioned, recruiters look at your resume for a very short amount of time. I have this recommended format for your resume, especially in this order specifically. And I've actually talked to my recruiter at Google about this, and she mentioned specifically always keep education at the top for an internship application. So this is the order I use and I recommend. So have your education first, your experience, because that's like the most important thing, your projects, because that's the second most important thing. Your projects make up for your lack of experience and show that you're interested in the field. Your skills, competitions, say you've been to hackathons or the ACM competitions, stuff like that, and your awards if you've won anything at those competitions or you've received scholarships or anything like that. And then there's some common things that I don't recommend having on your resume, such as a summary, references. I've never been asked for references ever in a tech job. Your address, keeping your city and country is fine. I do that, but don't put your full address. Nobody's going to send you an offer letter or an interview request by mail. Don't have images or logos on your resume. Please don't do that. And a relevant experience, I say that only if you need the space. If you really need to fill space, like if your resume is really blank, then definitely put a relevant experience. But if you're running out of room and you want to keep it to one page, don't use a relevant experience. And interests. Some people will say, I'm interested in AI, I'm interested in this, and they'll have a bunch of bullet points. I don't recommend having that either, unless you really need to fill space. Somebody asked, would scholarships be good to put under education? Yeah, that could also go under education. I personally put it under awards, but I don't see any problem with doing it either way. Somebody asked, is it okay to make jokes for those types of questions? I'm assuming you meant like uh, something along with the interviews. Yeah, definitely joke around. Show some sense of humor for sure, as long as it's not like, risky humor. Okay, so this is a newer slide I added after my last presentation, I think, because a lot of people would ask me this. I have zero experience, or I'm a first year student. What do I do? How do I get myself an internship? So here's the roadmap that I wrote out. So first, make at least one project. And I'm not talking like a school project, I'm talking your own personal project. And like I mentioned, hackathons are great for this. Second is build a clean resume using the previous tips that we just talked about. Third is try to get a research position or any sort of small position like volunteer work. I know, like, I think I just got an email that Enactus, it's a business group made by business students at the University of Windsor. They're always looking for like a web dev to help work on their website. It's volunteer work, but it's experience. That's what I did in my first year. And research positions are awesome. They're an awesome way to get experience because usually you're getting paid, and they'll give these to pretty much, well, not pretty much everyone, but they'll give these definitely to people who haven't had any experience before. They usually don't care about that past experience. They care more about your academics and your grades for research. So build some relationships with profs, or even if you don't know them. I got my research position by going up to Dr. Kent, never spoke to him a day in my life. And I said, hey, are you looking for any help with any projects? And he said, yeah, come see me after class. And I got a position just like that. I know it's definitely not that easy most of the time, but it doesn't hurt to ask a prof, even if you don't know them well. But if you do, it helps a lot. So you have nothing to lose by asking. And the next step is just start applying. So if you're reading this and going like, oh shit, I haven't done any of these things, get on it. Start, make a project, build your resume. You have plenty of time still. Research is usually harder to get until you're in at least second year, but yeah, you can definitely complete some of these steps and start applying. And like I mentioned, it's kind of like the prime time to apply over the next month or two for summer internships. So working in the USA, this is also a question I got a lot. So a lot of people end up working in the US at some point if you're in tech. If you're in tech, so some of the reasons and benefits of that is that there's a lot higher pay. There's no question about that. You're going to get paid more in the US. There's more opportunities. Again, no question about that. Silicon Valley has so many, like it's unbelievable. I'm walking around San Francisco and walking to my office in the morning, and everyone around you is wearing some sort of tech backpack with their company logo on it. Everybody's in tech. Every company out there is tech. That city is tech. So there's a ton of opportunity out there, and there's a lot of fun cities like San Francisco and New York and LA to work in. So San Fran and New York are like the biggest for tech too. Um, so to work in as a student in the U.S., complete an internship there, you're going to need a J1 visa. So a common misconception is that like, oh, I need a visa. Let me go apply for one right now so that a company can see that I have one and they'll be more likely to hire me. I thought this when I was in first year. Turns out that's not the case. A company has to sponsor you. You cannot get a visa on your own. You need to interview with this company and they have to say, okay, we're going to get you a visa. So a visa is always tied to an employer. It's not tied to the person. So if you lose your job, you lose your visa. Um, and the J1 visa, by the way, is required for everyone, regardless of your citizenship. So if you're a Canadian citizen or an international student, either way, you're going to get a J1 visa. The application process is a little different depending on it. If you're Canadian, it's a little easier. You get to skip a step, but for international students, you usually have to do like an interview at the embassy, which is pretty straightforward, I hear, but it's just an extra step. But once you get that company that's willing to hire you, they usually take care of most of the visa stuff. They'll ask you for some documents, and that's about it. They're going to take care of the hard stuff, so you don't have to worry about that. All right. Checking out the chat. Yeah, the slides will be available. Actually, they're already on the CSS website, but I think I'll also have this actual presentation available to be watched afterwards. Um, what do you do in research? That's a good question. To be honest, my research position was like I barely did anything because, well, I got that, used that for leverage to get an internship, and then I gave up on the research once I got that. But what I was doing was working on a web application in Rails for like a hospital. Um, it the work varies a lot, but usually you're working on some cool field, some cool project. Um, I don't know. It's hard for me to describe it because I only did one small position, but it varies a lot. But it's usually some pretty cool stuff from what I've heard. Somebody asked about TN visas. So TN visas are usually used for full-time employees. That's what they're meant for. And it's only meant for Canadian and Mexican citizens. Uh, the process to get one's a lot easier, actually even easier than a J1 visa. Um, but it's meant for full-time employees, and there's only one company that uses it for interns, and it's Tesla, like somebody else said. Tesla uses a TN visa for interns because it's easier to get than J1, and I think it's cheaper, and they go through some weird loophole that only Tesla seems to use for some reason. So if you're getting an internship in the States, regardless of your citizenship, you're probably getting a J1 visa. If you're going for a full-time job and you're Canadian or Mexican, you're getting a TN visa. Otherwise, if you're international, you're getting a H1B. Lucas asked, would you have to open an American bank account and apply for an American credit card yourself? Yes. Most companies, I think all companies, require an American bank account to actually be able to pay you. So it's very easy. I just did that, and most people do this on their first day of arriving. So I fly to California for my internship on like a Saturday, starting on Monday. On Saturday, I'll go to the bank, set up an account. It's really easy. Took less than an hour. You might even be able to do it online at some banks. And the same thing with the credit card. You do it like you would in Canada. You go to your bank, you apply for one. The difference is you need a social security number in the US, which you probably will have to apply to as well to get paid. And you can't do that until you're in the US as well. So it's a long process, but the company will explain all of this to you. Some frequently asked questions. What languages and tools should I know to attract companies? Somebody says, what's the best language to know? Or how many languages should I know? Pretty much any popular language is good. It doesn't matter what languages you know, unless you go for like a really specific field or a really specific company. Most companies understand that if you know one language well, you can transition that knowledge to another language. Most of them are very similar. And a lot of people think that the more languages you know, the better. That's not true. Unless, of course, you're an expert in all of them, then yeah, you're going to be a lot more marketable. But if you know a little bit of Python, if you're trying to stack the number of languages on your resume, it's probably not going to work out that well. Try to learn one or two really well instead of learning a little bit of a bunch of languages. How important are grades? So grades are surprisingly not as important as most people think for tech. Very few companies will ever ask for your transcript at all, and some might ask for your GPA when you're applying, but I don't think they even consider it when reviewing your application. Um, in my experience, like I showed you the one sheet where I applied to 160 places in my first year, but there's also the following years. So I've probably applied to over 200 places, and only Google actually asked me for my transcript, and my grades aren't fantastic, and I still got the job. So they say it's just for some sort of HR purposes. I don't know what they are, but very, very few companies care about your grades. You you know you could have a 60 average And as long as you have some cool projects and maybe some experience, you'll get interviews. So grades are really not as important as people make it sound. And yeah, that's the end of the presentation. So stick around for a few minutes if you guys have any questions. Just ask them in the YouTube chat. Jeremy's talking about how I recommended Delta Hacks. Delta Hacks was the first hackathon that I went to, and it was an awesome time. Um, they had great food. They had unlimited snacks. We actually snuck in and grabbed a whole case of Red Bull. You're not supposed to do that. And we had a great time, but I guess, I told everybody to go to it, and they did the next year, and apparently it was just horrible. So apparently I'm not trustworthy anymore. Glad I could help, guys. Brandon asked, how important do you think it is for people to learn Git? So Git, if you're not familiar, you've probably heard the term Git or GitHub. They're two different things. GitHub is the website that hosts Git repositories, and Git is a version control software or tool that's been around for a long time that people use in most companies to track, code history changes, stuff like that. It can be very complex, and it could be very scary looking at first if you're trying to learn it, but eventually you're going to have to learn this in a job. So learning Git is definitely a really helpful tool, and the best way to do that, like if you're thinking, how do I even start with that? Try adding your projects to GitHub, uploading your projects. And I don't mean go to GitHub and upload files manually through the web browser. I mean using the command line tools for Git. It's a very useful tool, and I recommend everybody learn it. How do you learn enough to make a side project? That's a good question. School definitely helps. The knowledge you learn in school, but you can definitely learn on your own. Honestly, it depends on the way you learn. So a lot of people will like read books and watch YouTube videos on how to do stuff or read documentation, and that's how they learn. They learn through stuff like that. For me, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody learns differently. For me, I like to say, "Hey, I want to do this," and just start with what I know and Google my way through. That's what I do every day at work. That's what I've always done. I just learn as I go, and that's the way I learn. But yeah, just try one of those methods. In my case, if I knew nothing, I would just Google my way, say like, okay, hey, I want to make a project that does this, and start Googling my way to accomplish that. But yeah, hackathons is the best thing to kind of force you to do that because you're working with a bunch of people who might be able to help you. First of all, they have workshops to help people that are beginners, and I cannot emphasize enough how great hackathons are for, especially for the earlier year students. Good question. What's the best language for leak code or interviews? Um, Use any of the popular languages. I think the most common are either Java or Python. Um, it's just the most popular static type language versus the most popular dynamically typed language. That's like the biggest differences. Try to use one of the popular languages like that. Don't use like, I don't know. I tried Ruby at one point, and people were like, "What the hell is this?" I mean, it does look a lot like Python, but not familiar enough for people to understand what I'm doing. So don't use a specialized language, but Java or Python are my recommendations. I think most people would recommend Python just because it has a lot of shortcuts to make things easier. Harshdeep asked, I feel I have exhausted my LinkedIn list of job postings. Where else can I search? Uh, Intern Supply and those other sites I linked in the slides. Another suggestion is like Say there's a certain company you want to work for. Um, Say I want to work at Shopify. You can look up, the company's name and careers. Almost every company will have a careers page, and you can just search for jobs there and find jobs there. So this is like if you have a very specific company that you want to work on. So you can see there's a whole section for internships here. Any good jokes to tell at interviews? Um, I don't have suggestions because my humor is not safe for interviews, I guess. Do you have a hard time keeping up on with your spreadsheet? So I actually don't use the spreadsheet anymore, but that's probably because after those three internships, I stopped applying to places and or stopped applying to every place I could. And since I had built up the resume to get interviews at most companies, I kept it to specific companies that I was interested in. So I don't have a hard time anymore, but I did definitely have a hard time keeping that updated when I was applying to hundreds of places. That's a good question. So, what should a CS graduate who was never in a co-op program do to get a job? So, basically, they're a CS graduate with no experience. How do they get a job? I think the same kind of roadmap applies. Try to build some personal projects or get some volunteer positions. If you're a graduate that still attends the university in some sort of way, I don't know, like if you're doing your master's or something, you could try to get a research position. I think profs actually can hire research assistants who aren't actually students anymore. That might be possible, but I'd try with projects, job fairs, volunteer experience if you had to resort to it as a graduate. But I think projects is one of the best ways, and try to network and get referrals to places. Can you talk about a template for what to include when reaching out to recruiters so that they actually reply to you? I don't really use a template. I kind of mentioned before, try to send something unique, something relatable, like I did with a recruiter at Tesla. He had a funny post that was relatable. I replied to it or I messaged him about it, and I got the conversation rolling. But if you have the resume and credentials to do it, you could also just like the other day, there was one time where I messaged a recruiter from a company and I was just like, hey, sure, I sugarcoated it. I said, hey, I was looking at your positions. I'm really interested in this company. I love the product and I use it all the time. Um, I have a lot of experience at these three fantastic companies and kind of just flexed a little bit. And I said, I was wondering if we could talk more about these positions and got an interview through that. So it depends on your status and your approach. But I think just sending something unique is the best way. How do I answer the biggest weakness type of question? Um, yeah, that's always a tough one, and you might get that. Like, what is your biggest weaknesses or what are your biggest flaws? I try to be honest. For me, I say like sometimes I get too focused on a solution, that just isn't working, but because I'm so far down the rabbit hole, I commit to it instead of just abandoning it and trying something else. It's a hard one. I recommend just looking at articles on how to answer this question because they could probably give you better advice than I could. What kind of domain specific knowledge is really marketable, like a specialization? I think the biggest things right now are web dev. I know there's like a shortage of front end devs at every company I've worked at because you don't really learn that in school. You don't learn to work with React or Angular or React Native and stuff like that, JavaScript in school. So I think that's a skill that a lot of companies are looking for, as well as like AI and machine learning. But that's more a lot of companies that are hiring for that usually look for grad or PhD students. All right, I'll just stick around for another minute to see if there's any more questions. Otherwise, I'm going to sign off. Thanks again, everybody, for coming. That's a great question. Lucas asked about the different streams for computer science, especially at the University of Windsor, to join, like AI and software engineering. Um, and then I think we have multimedia and maybe a gaming specialization. Um, I say that's up to personal preference. I took the regular honors CS program. I didn't specialize in anything, and that was because even though I ended up becoming a software engineer, I found that, and a lot of people debate this, but the software engineering stream makes you do a lot of courses that aren't related to computer science. Like you have to choose from like philosophy and some other stuff. And there's like it takes up I think six additional courses. Uh, that it takes away I think it's four or six courses that you would get as electives on a regular CS honors degree. So I stayed away from that, but it does give you a different, little bit of a different degree. With software engineering, you get a Bachelor of Science, whereas with regular CS honors, you get a Bachelor of Computer Science. Some people argue that it's easier to get a visa with a Bachelor of Science, but I disagree, and so do most others who did get a visa without issue. So, um, but yeah, if you're interested, that's just the software engineering degree. If you're interested in AI, it's definitely a lot more like all AI courses. It's not like software engineering where you have to take English and philosophy and stuff like that. So if you're interested in AI, definitely by all means do the specialization. All right, this question keeps coming up, so I'll answer it. Do you recommend I keep interviewing with companies even if I have a full-time job just because I can? That's a jab at me because that's exactly what I've been doing, just for fun. Sometimes I apply to companies just to see what happens. How do you think of project ideas? Do you have a list of good generic ones to try or a website to look for inspiration? For me, it like for the hackathon, I just got together with friends and kind of thought of like a fun project. We ended up making like a bot that went on a user's Twitter profile to determine their interests and stuff like that. It was basically a bot to be like a wingman if they were interested in someone. Um, but that was just because we had a big group of friends and kind of brainstormed together. But if you're on your own, for me, it's usually just been like if something comes up. So, for example, I until like 3 years ago, I did not have Spotify, and I used MP3 files that I would download illegally. And eventually, I switched to Spotify, and I found that there was no way to add my MP3 collection to my Spotify account. So I ended up building a Python project that would look at the names of the files and the metadata, like the author and stuff, and search through Spotify for a related song and add that to my library. So basically converted my library from MP3 files to my Spotify account. So usually for me, it's just things that come up. Somebody recommended getting a minor of math and computer science. Is that good? Yeah, I mean, so if you're in the regular CS honors degree with no specialization, you actually will get a minor in math. If you're in software engineering, I think you have to take one more math course to get the minor. I think it looks good on a resume. If you like math and you don't struggle with it, I'd say do it because a lot of the more advanced positions definitely are kind of math related, so it helps. But like I didn't even do that, so um, it's just preference. Is learning full stack a good thing to do? I mean, it's good because you kind of learn a. a lot of the stuff about backend development and not necessarily web development, but like the back end of things through your CS degree. So if you complete a CS degree and also try to learn like front end stuff, you can basically work as a full stack developer, and I think it makes you more marketable. But it really depends on what you want to do. Like I don't consider myself full stack. I don't know anything about front end. Is the full time hunt for jobs harder than the internship hunt? Yes. Yes. I had a very bad experience once I started applying to full time positions after all my internships were done. Um, I think partly, I think that tech jobs were actually already, even before COVID, they were getting a little harder to find. Um, but I applied to a lot of places, even places that I got an interview for, like years before for like internships. I applied to full time with a much better resume than I did when I got an interview, and I actually didn't get interviews at all. I found it a lot harder, and the interview process is a lot longer. Like at Google, you go from a coding challenge and two interviews to a coding challenge to phone interviews and then four on-site interviews. So it's definitely harder. But if you have internships already on your plate, you can really easily convert to full-time employee there. So it makes it a lot easier, a lot less stressful. What are the kind of problems you have to solve as a backend dev? That kind of it ranges a lot. It depends, like what kind of project you're working on as a backend dev. Um, like for example, I'm in backend web development, so like no, I'm not designing web pages or looking at front ends at all. I'm working on the back end of a Rails application, and what's an example of a good problem I worked on recently? Um, Figuring out how to disable taxes on specific items at Shopify, allowing the merchant to disable taxes for a specific customer, and updating the order summary to reflect that, and handling different tax regions. Like, say, they bought an item in Ontario and they went to a Montreal, Quebec store to refund it or exchange a new item. Then they have a different tax system. How do you handle taxes there? Um, Stuff like that. That's just an example of something recently I worked on. Yeah, to study for coding challenges, definitely use LeetCode in cracking the coding interview. If you're living in the GTA area but get a job in Windsor, I would. Should I not take that job? I mean, if it's a good job, why not? And if you have no options, definitely. There's more opportunity in Toronto, no questions about that. But like, if it's your only option, why not? You could always move back. Anyway, I'm gonna sign off. I'm gonna get back to work. So thank you all for coming. I hope this helped. Um, if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me on the Discord. You can see the slides of this presentation on the CSS website under the student guide in the internship section. And I'll probably post or get a link to this stream posted somewhere. So thanks for coming. See ya.